So we now come on to my talk, which is, as you see from the title, 9/11, Sequestered Technologies and the Control of Information. And we will try and have time for questions at the end of the day. So in this presentation we will attempt to look at what some people have said about free energy devices, because it's all about energy. This, for people that saw the programs that I did with Richard last week and the week before, this kind of fleshes out some of that story, and I think Richard did a brilliant job, as he always does on these programs. And again, I'd like to thank him at this point for all that he's done and the support that he's given to the research of Dr. Judy Wood, because without that, I don't think there were probably quite a few people in this room would never have heard of it, because they've tried to cover it up. But I think slowly we're starting to win the battle now, but I'll come to that later. We're going to have a brief mention of several inventors and inventions in relation to free energy, that is. Some of the sequestered free energy technologies as well, of course. We're going to look at one of the reproduction of Tesla's experiments by somebody called Paulsness, who had a YouTube channel. And then one of the central things I want to cover is the cold fusion story, which involves Dr. Eugene Malov and Stephen E. Jones. And we're also going to talk about John Hutchison as well, who's a very key figure in this story. We'll look a bit about water-powered vehicles, which Richard covered in his program a little bit. A bit on Bedini motors, Bruce De Palma and the End Machine, which is a very important part of the story as well. We're going to look at the death of some of these inventors. A few of these people, as covered in Richard's program, turn up dead. We're going to try and mention Dr. Stephen Greer and his energy-related projects, which I think also form an important part of this story. And we're going to then look at why we haven't got widespread use of free energy, why we're still stuck in the fossil fuel paradigm completely. And then we're going to look at the main reason for that people don't talk about is this free energy technology is already known about. It's not a theory. It's not that, we think we might be able to do it. Somebody is able to do it because it's already been turned into a weapon, and that weapon was used to destroy the World Trade Center, which is one of the key things in all of this that very few people will talk about. It's heavily censored on the internet, which I'll come to. Common statements: there's no such thing as free energy, right? No such thing as free energy. And there's no such thing as a free lunch. You've all heard these sorts of expressions. Free energy is impossible. It breaks the first law of thermodynamics. Energy can neither be created nor destroyed, heat and mechanical work being mutually convertible. You can't get energy from nowhere, so there's no such thing as a perpetual motion machine. If someone had created a free energy device, they'd be a billionaire. That's another common statement that you hear people say. Why haven't we all got such a thing? It would be of such huge benefit. No one could or would want to suppress it. That'd be ridiculous. Yeah? If you can produce this, battery that lasts forever, you'll be a millionaire overnight. Of course you would. Of course you would. Well, I used to think that, but the truth is, no, you wouldn't. In fact, you're more likely to end up dead. Perpetual motion is impossible. Physicists will tell you that. No one has demonstrated a device which produces more energy than is fed into it in some form. I disagree with that statement. Now, over unity and perpetual motion. Over unity, you hear this expression in relation to free energy devices. That means you get out more energy than you put in. Okay? And it comes when you divide the amount of energy output by the amount of energy input, and you end up with a figure of greater than 1. You put 100 watts in, you get 200 watts out. Said to be impossible. It is often confused in physics as well. It's also called unity because a unity is another name for one. That's where this unity, word comes from. It is often confused with perpetual motion because the idea is then that you could connect the output of a free energy device into its input and it would run forever, in theory. And I've got one example. I'm going to have to probably skip over some of this because we won't have time to cover all of it, but I'll try and cover as much as I can. We're going to briefly look at Michael Faraday and Nikola Tesla now. And what we find is that if you look way back in history, Michael Faraday, he invented something called a homopolar generator. And this is like, as you see, Faraday died in 1867, so we're going back, almost 150 years. And he was an English chemist and physicist who studied the magnetic field around a conductor carrying a DC electric current. Okay? And he established the basis for the magnetic field concept in physics. It was him that actually came up with this. He discovered electromagnetic induction, diamagnetism, and the laws of electrolysis. Okay? Michael Faraday did an experiment on December 26, 1831, in which he co-rotated, that means rotated at the same time, a magnet with a copper disc and measured a current output. Even though he had done that experiment, his own law of induction tended to ignore that he'd done this. In other words, it produced an anomalous result according to his law. Known for over 150 years, the current generated during the operation of the Faraday homopolar generator could not be properly explained. So it's one of these things that's left buried in the textbooks as a real effect, but nobody could explain it. The world later embraced Faraday's two-piece induction generator, whose drawbacks include mechanical friction and electrical losses. And the rest is history. Tesla looked at free energy. He knew that we could get energy. He discovered it. He was able to tap into it to some extent. One day, man will connect his apparatus to the very wheelwork of the universe, and the very forces that motivate the planets in their orbits and cause them to rotate will rotate his own machinery. And that's essentially what he was trying to do, and I think he was successful in doing that, at least to some extent. Tesla's experiments showed that there was a radiant energy field, that's what he called it, present everywhere. It just needed the right equipment to extract this energy. And sometimes you needed to put energy into a system to make the radiant energy visible. Niagara Falls famously used generators which were originally designed by Tesla, and there's this story that when they first set these things going and they switched them on, they got such a sort of kick. When they shut them down, they got this huge sort of back EMF, and it blew out certain circuitry because they weren't expecting it. So it was as if this radiant energy, was coming from nowhere, and they didn't really expect it to be there. And ever since then, circuits have been designed to kind of try and get around that. Okay. Now, again, you can go on and look at the history of many free energy devices. I mean, there's lots of places on the internet you can find them. There's some that have actually been covered in TV documentaries. I've got another DVD with three TV documentaries on it where some of these are covered. And one of them is the hydrosonic pump, which was designed by James Griggs in the 1980s. And that was simply like a motor you put, it had a hollow spindle and a flywheel with holes in it. And you fed water through the middle of the spindle, and then the motor accelerated the water to come out through the fly holes in the flywheel, the wheels in the flywheel, and it would create an excess amount of energy. You would get more energy, it was about 125% efficient, according to the measurements that were made on this. Wilbert Smith designed a magnetic sink circuit in the 1950s to extract a small amount of energy from the Earth's magnetic field. And then you can also do some research, if you wish, into Schauberger's repulsine experiments in the 1930s and 40s, which some have claimed would be used for the basis of some of the alleged Nazi saucer technology, because this repulsine thing is supposed to have taken off. There's all kinds of stories about that. But I'm not going to go much into the Schauberger material here, so we don't have the time. Now, there's been a number of reproductions of some of Nikola Tesla's experiments, and a number of interesting videos you can find on YouTube that have been posted. They've reproduced the wireless transmission of power. This is a very key thing that Tesla developed, and there's this famous Wardenclyffe Tower that he built, which was funded initially by J.P. Morgan, and then he had his funding taken away. But what we're going to see here, I'm going to play this video from Paulsness, and you'll see that what's shown here is not ordinary electric current.
Good afternoon. I'm going to show you a few things that Tesla has sent to us many years ago. Out of his lectures, books, on page 134, figure 19, you'll see the circuit right here. And also the same circuit can be found in his book, The Innovations, Research and Writings of Nikola Tesla. In this book here, it's found in several places. The one we're going to be demonstrating today will be on figure 183. Also, I've gained some of this information from Jerry Vasilato's book, Lost Science, and his other book, Secrets of Cold War Technology. Both are invaluable. Here you'll see my setup. It's two copper rods connected across the top with another copper rod that is on a slidable scale. I can slide it up and down. I have lowered it from the higher position today just so you can see it on the film. My camera's not quite tall enough to catch the whole thing, but it slides up and down. It's just two parallel bars of copper. At the bottom of there is capacitors, just like he says in his book, and the spark gap in the front here, powered by a 10,000 volt transformer at the back. And I'll be connecting light bulbs across the bars on these two slidable points, both of which are independently slidable. All light bulbs are 110 volt bulbs. The only little bulb will be this bulb right here, which is a 12 volt light bulb. That's for out of an automobile type bulb. And this fluorescent tube here, I don't think it has a voltage rating on it. And we also have this big fluorescent tube over here. So I'll turn the machine on now. Arc is quite loud, so I won't be talking during this part of the demonstration.
So that proves that that is not normal electricity, but he makes it clear in the video you shouldn't mess around unless you know what you're doing. Tesla was messing around with that stuff, let's see, 100 years ago? And that's just, one example. But that, I mean, when I saw that, that was amazing. And there's other people that have done it as well. I'll just mention this fellow again, I'd like to almost do a whole presentation on this guy, Wilhelm Reich. He doesn't get talked about a lot. In fact, it surprises me because a lot of people are talking about chemtrails, weather modification. This guy's name hardly ever gets mentioned in that story. Okay, it gets mentioned in relation to orgone energy, which was this form of like life energy or ether energy that he discovered. Sometimes called perhaps etheric energy, zero-point energy or vacuum energy that Reich discovered. And he was actually studying this form of energy in relation to human sexuality, believe it or not. And he was actually, he worked as an assistant to Sigmund Freud, and he found that there was some type of energy, life energy, which was within people, which he then became very interested in. And he ended up constructing what are called orgone accumulators, and you can go and read about those. And Dr. Eugene Malov, who I'm going to talk about later, he became interested in Wright's research in the 80s and 90s, in the 90s probably. And other people have reproduced Wright's experiments in Russia and so on. And so some of the things you can get out of orgone accumulators are also very anomalous. They don't appear to make sense in the standard form of physics. So he's somebody you can look into as well. Now, this is something that Richard and I discussed in the programme. Low energy nuclear reactions. Is this pathological science? That's what it was labelled as. I think it's actually a pathological cover-up. And that's what's happened. Because I contend that when cold fusion came onto the scene in 1989, the academic community realised that this was kind of a hole that they had to plug very quickly. Because if this research got going and got out there, it was going to be lampshade time for the fossil fuel-based companies. Now, Pons and Fleischmann were world-class chemists, and they worked at the University of Utah. And they had worked for 5 years to develop a process which seemed to yield too much energy to be a simple chemical reaction. Again, they were chemists. What do chemists study? Chemical reactions. And they do have to know about what sort of energy it goes into and comes out of certain chemical reactions to be able to develop them into use in industrial processes and so on. So they knew what they were doing. And they discovered that if they mix together deuterated water, lithium hydroxide and a palladium electrode, and you set this up in a particular way, they actually observed neutron emission. Now, a neutron is a particle of no charge according to the standard atomic theory, and you should only see that when you've got a radioactive compound in its vicinity. But they were actually detecting neutron emission. I'll play the clip and you'll see a bit more how this works. I won't describe it here. In 1989, they announced their findings at a press conference, which was very unusual. They wouldn't normally do that. They would normally do it in a scientific journal, and then it would be peer-reviewed. They were criticised for this, as they would normally have announced it in a peer-reviewed journal, as I say. Now, cold fusion should more correctly be called low-energy nuclear reactions, LENR. And this somewhat inaccurate description, cold fusion, appears to have been coined by a certain Stephen E. Thermite Jones, believe it or not. Yeah. It was him that coined that term around 1989. Isn't that strange?
Wasn't it him that caused Fleischmann and his mate to announce?
Essentially, he was involved in trying to discredit cold fusion. Jones was.
Water itself is quite a mysterious and powerful substance. Given enough time, it can erode steel and rock. It is composed of hydrogen and oxygen, two of the most reactive elements on Earth. Science has also known for over 200 years how to extract hydrogen and oxygen gas from water through the process of electrolysis. It was from this field of electrochemistry and not nuclear physics that there emerged a revolutionary idea of a new kind of fire from water. In the 1980s, Fleischmann and Pons used their own money to conduct experiments for 5 years. They passed a current through an electrochemical cell containing heavy water, or deuterium oxide. One of the electrodes, the negatively charged cathode, was made of the precious metal palladium. The electrical current separated individual deuterium nuclei, or deuterons, from the heavy water and forced them to pack tightly into the palladium cathode. What happened next inside the palladium at the atomic level remains a mystery, and became the subject of intense debate. Whether it was actual nuclear fusion or some other as yet unknown phenomenon, the result produced far more excess heat energy than any known chemical reaction. Why is such a phenomenon so astonishing? Why did it provoke such outrage in the physics community? To most classically trained physicists, the concept of low-level nuclear reactions producing significant heat energy was inconceivable.
it was a very unfortunate time to make such an announcement for various political reasons, really. The situation in the United States, the situation with regard to the program in hot fusion. So that was against it, but also, of course, was the fact that we were not ready to make such an announcement. The criticism of pathological science is one which has quite frequently been leveled at unusual investigations, which admittedly sometimes are at fault. However, there is also the situation that people will criticize a field long after they should really have given up, and that is pathological criticism. They just get trapped in a situation. They have made a criticism. They have to maintain their criticism against all the evidence.
At Texas A&M, a group led by Professor John Bockris, who is widely regarded as one of the world's greatest electrochemists, reported finding the hydrogen isotope tritium, a key signature that some unusual nuclear reaction was going on.
The first thing was this thing called tritium, which was a sub-form of hydrogen which should not exist except in extremely tiny quantities. We found that by working these cells of Fleischmann and Pons containing lithium hydroxide and deuterium oxide, that we could produce this tritium in great abundance, let's say at 10,000 times more than it ought to be there, as it were. And let me stress that we couldn't do it every time, but about one result in 5 or one result in 4, and eventually we worked up to 2 results out of 3. We could produce tritium. That was the first thing, and in a way it was the first clear proof of the phenomenon.
At Texas A&M, Bockris's group found themselves under attack. Science magazine writer Gary Taubes wrote a stinging article that insinuated that someone in the group had spiked the samples with tritium. Although unfounded and eventually proved untrue, the allegation effectively dampened Bockris's remarkable claims.
Well, I was 69 years old at that time. I took the attitude, suppose they fire me, right? It doesn't really matter. I'd had my career. The worst they could do would be to say, go, your tenure is withdrawn. And therefore I wasn't frightened. And I went on saying the truth and publishing what we'd got. But finally the university revolted against this. And they set up an inquiry, they called it rather sinisterly. The accusation was that I had carried out misconduct of research, you see, that I shouldn't have worked on these things. And they decided that the accusations were totally groundless, and they published all this. But then they started all again about 6 months later, and they had another committee. It was this time, when my lawyers asked the university what the second inquiry was about, they were told, it's an ad hoc committee. What's that? We have nothing further to tell you. And so this went on for 11 months of constant meetings and inquiries and so on. And I'm quite sure that they were trying to find an excuse to end my tenure, you see. Finally they came out okay. I mean, they gave me another letter. I'd had the letter of complete exoneration. This time it said that they had spent this 11 months and had found that I had never done anything, the phrase used were, that contravened the rules of procedure of this university, or something rather formal and stuffy like that. But I think the main part was that I had done work which was against the paradigm, and that was what they were really upset about. You know, people said that they'd been to other universities and people had laughed at it and said, what the heck are you doing, trying to disprove the laws of nuclear physics? And of course that's exactly what we were doing, and succeeding, you see.
Even though positive results were still coming in, the Department of Energy's negative report effectively killed congressional funding in the United States. Fleischmann and Pons later packed their bags and left for France to carry on private research sponsored by the Toyota Corporation.
by 1992 we had video recordings of intense energy release. By the summer of 1994 we had demonstrated sustained energy release. That, of course, if you say you wish to make this into a device, required further research. And we were always working on a time frame of trying to get to that point by about the year 2000.